Today I'm joined by the Green Party's Justice spokesperson, Honourable Golriz Ghahraman.
Kia ora, Golriz Ghahraman. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the Impact Statement.
Kia ora, it's nice to be here.
So you've been watching victims' issues closely as a former lawyer and in your current role as well. So in your mind, why do victims matter?
Well, victims essentially are the whole purpose of our criminal justice system. But more than that, and I think we sometimes pretend like the criminal justice system is somehow going to restore people magically. More than that, victims are in our communities. Their lives go on. They won't be defined by their victimhood, ideally. And so we do have, to my mind, that responsibility to acknowledge that every system that we design has to have at its heart that idea that whether it's the justice system, the healthcare system, education, our social welfare system, that there will be victims of trauma who have to interact with those systems and be served well by them.
Exactly. So you said, yeah, victims at the heart. There's often a lot of political talk about victims at the heart and being victim-centric. So yeah. What does victim-centric mean to you?
So I find it really shocking the way that victims are constantly referred to in speeches in the House, for example, where we are not in fact talking about how to best support victims. We're talking about the other thing, which is about punishment, and you know, that definitely has a place, I guess, in our justice system, but it's that bit of it is just so not about victims. And so that idea of being victim-centric, I believe, means listening to victims in a holistic way. So it of course means knowing how the criminal justice process, from the point of, you know, the police getting involved all the way to the very end, including sentencing, has a voice of the victims and has the needs of the victims involved. But it also means that we acknowledge that these are whole people, you know, that we actually do need to support them through mental health care, for example, housing, you know, whether they need time off work and whether that will be a livable option for them, whether or not they want to call the police. That should be the case, you know, whether or not they want to go through that whole big justice process, they are victims. Yes. So how do we, you know, how do we create a victim-centric approach that takes account of the whole person and their whole life, including their whānau, including, you know, the mums that come through our justice system have kids, you know, and the dads. And so how do we listen to victims in a way that actually supports them and restores them eventually? Because that should be the purpose, right?
Absolutely.
You know, it's not a tick box. It's a process of hopefully restoration.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, listening to victims, allowing victims to have a voice, and just picking up on what you said before about even if victims don't report the crime, they're still victims. And that's an issue that we face at Victim Support, is that we're actually there for victims even if they don't report the crime.
Well, this is it. It's not, yeah, because it's a tough thing to go through the criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system has a purpose. It's trying to adjudicate the guilt of the particular person in front of the court in a fair and transparent way. This isn't actually that restorative thing that victims need. So to focus solely on the criminal justice system not only leaves out all of the victims who actually just want to do other, you know, get on with their lives and don't feel strong enough to go through the justice system, don't feel the need but have other needs. But it also doesn't particularly serve the victims that do go through the justice system, because its purpose isn't restorative. It's an adjudication tool. It's a very limited, it's precious, but it's very limited for victims.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like, victim-centric in your mind, there could be a lot more that could happen within the justice system to be more
Yeah.
restorative for victims, but also outside the justice system also, particularly for those who choose not to report.
That's it. I just want us to acknowledge that victim-centric it's not going to be achieved through the justice system alone. Even if you get the result that you wanted, there's a moment of victory, but after that, the ongoing impacts are there, as you will well know. There's two questions. It's how do we have a victim-centric justice process, but then how do we call ourselves a victim-centric community and society? And there's a lot more in policy, to my mind.
And it's not just looking at the justice system, it's actually looking at the responses in society to victims. Like, we're doing a piece of research at the moment on victim blaming, and victims are not only finding that they're blamed in the system, but often the biggest hurt is being blamed by their own family and friends and those closest to them.
Yeah. You have to be the perfect victim, don't you?
Yes, exactly.
To get the support that you need.
Yeah, it's about expanding our view, and I think also about taking responsibility as an individual in society for victims' needs. So often we think, oh, that doesn't happen to me, that never happens in my community, doesn't affect my people I know. But actually, any one of us could be a victim at any time. And there are victims walking amongst us who don't feel safe enough to report, so they haven't even had a voice, they perhaps haven't even shared what's gone on.
No, of course not. And I mean, I think the other thing is that we keep tinkering with, say, the trial process. And, again, there's a lot that probably does need to be tinkered with. But that isn't going to mean that all the victims who don't report are going to report, because the reality is that they're not silenced because they know the rules of cross-examination or whatever. They're actually silenced by a whole lot of other things that are going on in our society. It may just be that they don't feel strong enough with their mental health yet, and we don't have access to mental health care in New Zealand before you have a full crisis. Like that's a huge fundamental failure for victims, because who accesses mental health care? Something's happened. I mean, we all need to, but
Yeah. Exactly. So those are some of the key issues that you've identified just right there in that conversation, I think, that are facing victims right now. Anything else that's top of mind for you that you think is really a priority for victims at the moment?
So an accused person comes into the justice system and has access to a lawyer from the first contact with police, which is, again, as it should be. But victims don't. And quite often that first contact that lawyers have with their client is actually about explaining the process. And it certainly is about explaining their rights, which can be it's a complex and scary system for both sides. So victim support is obviously there for that emotional support and also just that support going through the whole thing. But victims, and you often read their statements, and I always thought if someone had explained to her rights and the process, this would have been, and I know it's maybe it's a legalistic way of coming at it, but I wish that we had legal aid for victims from the point of contact with police. So I just always seemed like a massive gap to me that there was no legal aid access for victims if they need it at that point of coming to the police. I work with Marama Davidson, who is obviously the Minister for Domestic and Sexual Violence, and in that context we see all of the missing bits of the community-led solutions for people. So again, that kind of not necessarily an alternative to the justice system, but the bits that kind of run parallel, and so that people don't, and especially with gender-based crimes, so where people are in a home that they can't leave because they don't have a livable income. And until it gets to the point of a really serious crime and we go through the justice system and she has got, these kids and then at that point, she's not the perfect victim.
Yes.
Because she has stayed.
Exactly.
And so I just can't quite stress enough how much those other supports are letting, the lack of those supports in terms of a livable income, in terms of healthcare that anyone in society can properly access with cultural appropriateness, mental health care, addiction treatment, all of those things are kind of actually leading to so much escalation in crime and escalation of victim trauma, because they're not able to leave dangerous situations, and when they do, they're not able to get the support they need to kind of get back on their feet, restore, rejoin the community, all of that. Yeah, so victim-centric definitely needs to be holistic.
It's a great definition, actually, isn't it, of being victim-centric? It's really looking at the holistic needs of a victim and their whānau.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I keep saying this word, but we do need to have a restorative approach. It's not a tick box. It's not one size fits all. Yes. You know, or you call the police, you go through the trial, you get the conviction, we send them away for life or whatever. You know, people who talk about tough on crime always bring up victims, and that idea that, oh, well, he went away, so now you're restored. It's just not right. And that process has just put that victim through extra trauma. So what are we going to do now for them?
Yes, they're quite possibly worse off at the end of the trial than they were before they entered the justice system. And it's a cop-out to think that, you know, the sentence or the verdict is closure, and that's another word that I think breaks a lot of people, you know, up there with victim-centric. There's actually no such thing. I mean, that's what we see on the ground at victim support. There's really no such thing as closure. And it's convenient to think that there might be, but in reality, yes, the victim journey is a different part of the journey is just beginning.
It's a journey, that's exactly it. And actually, the more serious the crime, the more serious the sentence, the less likely you are to suddenly have closure, because actually you are very seriously harmed, and the journey will have to continue.
So if Greens are in power, what would be your priorities for helping victims?
Well, like I say, our priority is to say that New Zealand needs to ensure that everyone who needs to access support at any point in any policy area is supported, and that the most marginalized are prioritized. So we're releasing packages as we go forward to the election. And like I say, because we have, you know, the Minister for Domestic and Sexual Violence sitting there at the table, we're always thinking of, okay, where do those victims fit in? And so one of the things that, I mean, I think I'm the most proud of is that package of livable incomes for those who access social welfare, but for everyone, actually, whatever has happened. So to say that we will not have anyone fall through the cracks at that point, so no one will have to worry that they can't leave a violent situation. Things like that fit together to say that actually we will be a society that will take care of victims, not keep pointing at the sentences, which I lose so much heart when I see every party constantly point at imprisonment as if that's somehow doing something for victims, just as they're talking about tax cuts that would take away healthcare and mental health care and livable incomes and housing. Crime is reduced through having all of those same things that we've talked about, having people with access to mental health care and with drug and alcohol treatment and with inclusive education and all of the things that help victims actually do keep everything safer. Right. And I certainly know that nobody is restored when that sentence comes down, and it's a harsh one. It's actually victim support that make the difference there. So for people to have had a conversation with someone that's on their side at some, you know, going through that process is probably going to be the thing that makes the difference rather than the sentence itself. The people that go through the justice system without that support, when they win, so to speak, they feel just as bad. And the people that go through with the support and with the explanations, feeling like their voice has been heard, even when they lose, so to speak, feel much more restored and happy, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's plenty of research to back up exactly what you just said. Great, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for what you do. It's just so important.